My name is Santiago Montoya, and before I died for 5 minutes on the southern highway of Medellin, I was the worst kind of man imaginable, a son who hated his own mother. I was born and raised in the poor neighborhood, on the hillsides of Comuna 1. My story doesn't begin with a motorcycle accident or a near-death experience. It begins much earlier, in the rotten heart of a 28-year-old who had made resentment his religion and hatred his daily prayer. The house where I lived with my mother, Doña Carmen Zarendon, widow of Montoya, was a small, 2-story building in the San Javier neighborhood, on the western hillside of Medellin. My father had died when I was 12. He was murdered in a settling of accounts that was never solved, just another statistic in the city's violent years. That house was all my mother had in this world: 2 bedrooms, a narrow living room, a kitchen where the smell of arepas and hot chocolate mingled every morning, and a small patio where she grew cilantro and mint. For her, that house was a palace. For me, it was a prison. I worked as a motorcycle messenger for a delivery company called Rappi Envios. I spent my days weaving through Medellin's infernal traffic, dodging metro buses, reckless taxi drivers, and the endless potholes in the streets. I earned barely 1,200,000 pesos a month, enough to survive, but never enough to get ahead. And every night, when I returned to that house in San Javier, the poison in my heart grew thicker. My mother was a devout woman to the core. At her age, her day began at 5 a.m. with the rosary. She had a small table next to her bed covered in holy cards: the Divine Child, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Saint Jude Thaddeus, images so worn that the colors had faded. Every night without fail, she would take out her well-worn Bible, that Reina Valera edition with yellowed pages and annotations in the margins, and read the Psalms aloud. She prayed for me, she prayed for the neighbors, she prayed for Colombia, she even prayed for the president, and I hated her for it. Why? Because I was a militant atheist, not simply someone who didn't believe in God, but someone who had made his unbelief an identity. I read Do Hitchens, watched debates on YouTube about why religion was the opium of the people. To me, my mother represented everything that was wrong with this country: poor people who were content to pray instead of act, who waited for miracles instead of going out and working harder. I told her that her God was an invention to keep the poor submissive. I yelled at her that her prayers hadn't saved my father from the bullets. I reminded her that all those novenas and promises hadn't put food on the table when we were children. But the worst part, what makes me a monster, when I confess it now, is that I actively, consciously, deliberately, wanted her dead because that house in San Javier, despite being humble, was located in an area that had increased in value. Real estate developers were buying properties in that sector. I had done my research. I could sell that house for 200 million pesos, maybe more. With that money, I could leave Colombia, go to Spain or Chile, start a new life far from poverty, far from the dangerous streets, far from my past. The problem was my mother. She would never sell. That house held the memories of my father, the laughter of my childhood, the walls she herself had painted. As long as she lived, I would be trapped. Then I began to wish in the silence of my mind that she would get sick, that cancer would take her quickly, that a heart attack would surprise her in her sleep, that God, if he existed, would take her at once so that I could be free. The abuse was constant. I didn't hit her. I never physically struck her, but my words were like fists. When she cooked, I criticized the food. When she cleaned, I deliberately made a mess. When she tried to talk to me, I put on my headphones and turned up the reggaeton. I would come home drunk some weekends, smelling of Antioquan liquor, and I would shout obscenities at her that now burn my throat just remembering them. I called her a useless old woman. I told her she was a burden. I told her I hoped she would die soon, and she... Do you know what my mother did? She cried silently. She locked herself in her room and prayed even louder. I could hear her through the thin walls. Lord Jesus, save him. Lord, he doesn't know what he's saying. Heavenly Father, take away the darkness from his heart. Those prayers infuriated me even more. I felt she was judging me, that she thought she was superior because she was religious, that she was using God as an excuse to make me feel guilty. The neighbors knew. In the neighborhoods of Medellin, everyone knows everything. Doña Beatriz from the third floor looked at me with disdain when I passed her on the stairs. Don Alberto from the corner store stopped greeting me. The ladies who met with my mother for the novenas on Tuesdays and Thursdays in our living room watched me with a mixture of pity and repulsion, but I had put on a shield. What did I care what they thought? They were also part of the same system of superstition and conformity. On August 15, 2023, the feast of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, although I had no idea what that date meant, our last argument happened. It was in the morning before I left for work. My mother had prepared calentado with beans, rice, a fried egg, and an arepa, my favorite breakfast since I was a child. But that day I was in a bad mood because I had lost money betting on an online soccer game. When she put the plate in front of me, I yelled that I didn't want to eat that poor person's food. I grabbed the plate and threw it on the kitchen floor. The bin spilled everywhere, the egg smashed against the wall. My mother knelt down to clean it up, and as she did, with tears falling onto the broken tiles, she said something I will never forget. Santiago, my son, I pray every day that God will show you the truth before it's too late. I love you even though you hate me, and when I'm gone, you'll remember this moment and you'll regret it. I laughed in his face. I said, hurry up and die then, old woman, so I can sell this pigsty and live in peace. I grabbed the helmet from my black Yamaha FZ motorcycle that was parked outside and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the whole house shook. I didn't know those would be the last words I'd say to her while I was alive. I didn't know that in less than 12 hours I'd be dead on a gurney at the San Vicente Foundation Hospital, and I didn't know that my mother, that woman I despised, was the only reason my soul wouldn't be dragged straight to hell. But I would discover all that on the other side. In those 5 eternal minutes where death showed me the truth that my pride had prevented me from seeing. That afternoon of August 15th, my delivery shift began like any other hellish day on the streets of Medellin. The Rap Envios app had been buzzing non-stop on my phone since 2 p.m. Orders from the Unicentro shopping mall in the El Poblado de Lollies neighborhood, from all over the city. I sped along on my Yamaha FZ, weaving between cars, squeezing through impossible spaces, racing against time and other couriers who also needed to complete as many deliveries as possible to earn their weekly bonus. My mother's words from that morning still echoed in my mind, but I had pushed them into a dark corner of my consciousness. I didn't want to think about her. I didn't want to feel anything. By 8 p.m., I had completed 23 deliveries. I was tired, my back aching from being hunched over the motorcycle for so long. But the app kept buzzing. Another order appeared on the screen: pick up a package at the Santa Fe shopping center in the south of the city and deliver it to an address in the municipality of Envigado. The pay was good, 30,000 pesos for that delivery alone. Because it was a long distance and it was already late, I accepted without thinking twice. I needed the money. I always needed the money. I picked up the package, a box of computer parts, according to the label, and programmed the route. On my GPS, the fastest way was to take the Southern Highway, that multi-lane road that runs through Medellin from north to south, passing through the famous Eastern Tunnel that connects to the Abara Valley. It was a route I knew well. I had driven it hundreds of times, but that night something was different. There was a strange feeling in the air, a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. We Colombians have a saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. My grandmother, may she rest in peace, used to say that when you feel chills for no reason, it's because an angel is passing nearby. I used to scoff at those superstitions, but that night, as I sped toward the Southern Highway, I got the chill. It was 9:15 p.m. when I entered the Eastern Tunnel. That tunnel is an impressive feat of engineering, over 4 kilometers long, illuminated by yellowish lights that give it an almost surreal appearance, as if you were traveling through the bowels of a giant beast. Traffic was moderate for that hour: cargo trucks, intercity buses, private cars, all flowing eastward. I was in the right lane at about 90 kilometers per hour with the package securely fastened in the trunk of my motorcycle. Then I saw it, a cargo truck from the Transportes Gonzalez company, one of those enormous tractor-trailers that transport goods between cities, began to invade my lane without signaling. The driver, I learned later, had fallen asleep at the wheel after driving for 12 continuous hours from the Caribbean coast. The truck moved slowly, but inevitably, toward my lane. Like a mindless metal monster, I honked desperately. I braked, with all the strength I could muster, but it was too late. My motorcycle's tires squealed against the pavement. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. I saw the tunnel lights turn into blurry lines. The impact was indescribable. The back of the truck hit my motorcycle on the left side with brutal force. I felt as if a giant hammer had smashed me against the ground. The motorcycle disintegrated beneath me, pieces of metal, plastic, glass, everything flying in slow motion. I was thrown through the air, spinning out of control, without my helmet, because it had been thrown off in the impact. My body bounced against the pavement once, twice, 3 times. Each impact was an explosion of pain that coursed through my entire being. I heard bones breaking. I tasted the metallic tang of blood in my mouth, and then, darkness. I didn't lose consciousness immediately. I lay in the middle of the eastern tunnel, watching the lights of the cars that stopped, hearing distant shouts, feeling a strange heat spreading through my chest. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I tried to scream, but no sound came from my throat. I could only see the tunnel ceiling, those yellow lights that now seemed to pulse with a hypnotic rhythm. I thought of my mother. For the first time in years, I thought of her without anger. I thought of how I had treated her that morning. I thought that my last words to her had been a death wish, and for the first time, I felt something akin to remorse. The Red Cross paramedics arrived in less than 10 minutes, but for me, it was an eternity. I heard their voices as if they were coming from the bottom of a well. Male patient, approximately 30 years old, multiple trauma, massive hemorrhage. I felt them moving me, placing me on a stretcher, and loading me into an ambulance. The sirens began to wail, that sharp sound that cuts through the night. One of the paramedics, a young man with a calm voice, spoke to me. "Hang on, brother, we're on our way to the hospital." Hang on, but I felt like I was sinking, as if falling into a dark ocean. Sometime during the journey to the San Vicente Foundation Hospital, located in the town, my heart stopped. According to the medical report I read later, I had a cardiac arrest inside the ambulance. The paramedics used the defibrillator twice. "Discharge it." One of them shouted. I felt the electric shock like lightning piercing my chest, but nothing changed. My heart wasn't responding. He ordered it again. Another shock. Nothing. By the time we arrived at the hospital, I was officially dead. I was taken straight to the trauma ward at San Vicente Hospital, that place where the most serious cases in the entire city arrive. The doctors and nurses moved with almost choreographed precision around my body. The doctor in charge, as I later learned, was Drive Hector J.V. Ruiz, a trauma surgeon with over 20 years of experience. He gave the orders: immediate intubation, central venous access, insert 2-4 lines, prepare for advanced cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The nurses connected monitors, injected medications, and performed manual chest compressions, but I wasn't there anymore. I mean, my body was on that cold metal gurney, under the bright surgical lights, surrounded by medical professionals fighting to bring me back to life. But I, Santiago Montoya, was no longer inside that broken and bleeding body. I was floating, hovering near the ceiling of the trauma room, looking down with perfect clarity, seeing everything that was happening with an eerie calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos below. I could see my own body. It was a disturbing sight. My face I was covered in blood, my left leg bent at an impossible angle, my chest open where the broken ribs had pierced the skin. The doctors applied the defibrillator again, charging it to 300 joules. Someone said, Santiago's body, the one I no longer felt was mine, arched with the shock. Nothing. Adrenaline, 1 mg/dl. Drive, Ruiz ordered. The compressions continued rhythmic, desperate. 1, 2, 3, cc. The nurse counted. From my position on the roof, I watched emotionlessly. I felt no pain, no fear, only a distant curiosity, as if I were watching a movie about someone else. I tried to talk to them, to tell them I was okay, that they could stop, but no one heard me, no one saw me. It was as if I were invisible, a ghost in my own death drive. Ruiz looked at the clock on the wall. 5 minutes of CPR with no response, he said wearily. I could hear the tone of defeat seeping into his words. Another, younger doctor suggested continuing, but drive. Ruiz refused, with his head. We have severe polytrauma, massive internal bleeding, more than 5 minutes without cerebral circulation. Even if we manage to restore it, the neurological damage would be devastating. His hand moved toward the heart monitor, preparing to turn it off and declare the official time of death. But then something changed, not in the trauma room, but in me. An invisible force began to pull me backward, away from the ceiling, away from my body, away from the doctors and the bright lights. It was as if a current of water were dragging me along, but there was no water, only darkness growing around me. I tried to resist, but it was useless. The last coherent thought I had before being completely pulled away was about my mother, about Doña Carmenza in that house in San Javier, unaware that her son had just died in a hospital on the other side of town. The trauma room disappeared, the light disappeared, the sound disappeared, and I fell or rose. I no longer knew which was up or down, toward a dimension no human being should ever see. Being dead, the journey had begun, and what I would see next would shatter every belief I had built, every atheistic argument I had defended, every taunt I had hurled at my mother and her faith, because the spiritual world is not a metaphor, it is more real than anything we can touch with our hands, and I was about to discover it in the most terrifying way possible. The darkness that enveloped me after I left the trauma room at St. Vincent's Hospital was not like the darkness of a room without light. It was a living, pulsating, almost tangible darkness. If I could describe it, I would say it was like being submerged in thick oil, except I had no physical body to feel weight or temperature. It was just consciousness floating in a void that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. There was no up or down, no measurable time, only a sense of being suspended in nothingness. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness broke. It wasn't a gradual change, but instantaneous, like changing the channel on a television. Suddenly I was seeing something. A scene began to materialize before me, blurry at first, then becoming clearer and clearer. It was my house, the house in San Javier, where I had lived with my mother. I immediately recognized the avocado green walls, which she herself had painted years before, the red and white tile floor that my father had laid when I was a child, the old living room furniture that we had bought second-hand at the San Ela market. But something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere of the house was transformed. The curtains were drawn, and the living room was full of people dressed in black. White flowers, gladioli and carnations, were arranged around something in the center of the room. I approached, or rather, was drawn toward that image without any control over my movement, and then I saw it. A coffin, simple with silver handles, were placed on 2 folding tables, and inside that coffin was me, my own lifeless body, dressed in a white shirt that I had never worn in life. My hands were crossed on my chest, my pale face made up by the embalmer to hide the damage from the accident, but I could see beyond the makeup. I could see the fractures in my skull, the broken bones under my skin, the emptiness behind my closed eyes. It was my wake. I was watching my own wake. Confusion hit me like a wave. How was this possible? The accident had happened just minutes ago, or so I thought, but here I was, apparently days later, with everything prepared for my funeral. Later I would understand that in that spiritual dimension, time doesn't work as it does in the physical world. What for the doctors had been 5 minutes of cardiac arrest had been enough in the spiritual realm for me to be transported to see future, present, and past events simultaneously. It was as if time had folded up on itself. The chairs in the room were filled with neighbors from the barrio. I met Doña Beatriz from the 3rd floor, Don Alberto from the store, and the ladies who came to pray the rosary with my mother. There were distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, co-workers from the delivery service in their orange uniforms. Even the priest from San Javier Parish, Father Gonzalo, was sitting near the coffin, wearing a black cassock and holding his Bible. Everyone was speaking in whispers, those respectful conversations people have at wakes. So young, what a tragedy. He was Doña Carmenza's only son, poor thing. And there she was, my mother, Doña Carmenza Rendon, widow of Montoya, sat in the front row, directly in front of the coffin. Her face was ravaged by grief, tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks, falling onto her hands, which held a rosary of white beads. Her lips moved constantly in silent prayer, but every now and then she would let out a broken moan that made the other women come closer to comfort her. "My little boy," she whispered, looking at the coffin, "my Santiago, my child." Each word was like a knife piercing me. If a spirit can be pierced, I tried to speak to her. "Mama, I'm here," I shouted with all the strength of my will. But no sound came out. I tried to touch her, to put my hand on her shoulder as I did when I was a child and she was sad. My hand passed through her like smoke. She felt nothing. No one in that room could see or hear me. I was a ghost at my own funeral, forced to witness the grief my death had caused, especially to the only person who had always loved me unconditionally. Father Gonzalo began to lead a prayer to Our Father who art in heaven. They all began to pray in unison. The voices blended into a monotonous murmur that filled the room. My mother prayed with more intensity than anyone, her lips moving rapidly, tears falling onto the rosary, and then I saw something that chilled my disembodied soul to its core. There was something else in that room, something the living couldn't see, entities, dark figures that didn't belong to this world. At first, I thought they were shadows cast by the candles burning around the coffin, but shadows don't move with intention, shadows don't have eyes, and these things had eyes. Bright red eyes that looked like burning coals in the darkness. There were 3 of them, or at least 3 that I could initially count. They were humanoid in their basic form, with something resembling arms, legs, and a head, but distorted, grotesque. Their bodies seemed made of thick, black smoke that constantly shifted shape, never solid, always moving. One of them was particularly large, almost touching the ceiling of the room, hung over like a vulture. Another was smaller, but more defined, with something like long claws that it dragged along the floor. The third had an almost skeletal form with ribs visible through its translucent shape. These entities were surrounding my mother. They circled around her like sharks around a bleeding wound in the ocean, and then I heard their voices. They weren't voices that sounded in the air, but voices that resonated directly in the mind, in the spirit. They were poisonous, seductive, malevolent whispers. Life is no longer worth living. The largest one whispered, leaning over my mother's right shoulder, "Your only son is gone, she's alone, completely alone." My mother trembled, though she couldn't consciously hear those words, but something in her spirit felt them. "It was your fault. If it was the one with the claws on his left side, you raised him badly. You failed as a mother, that's why he hated you, that's why he wished you dead." My mother's eyes closed tightly, as if trying to block out painful thoughts. "God abandoned you," the skeletal figure whispered from behind, its bony fingers almost touching my mother's head. "You prayed for him every day, and look how he ended up, dead in the street like a dog. Where was your God? Where was Jesus when your son cursed you? Your faith is a lie." The horror I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. These demonic creatures were attacking my mother at her most vulnerable, planting seeds of despair, guilt, and doubt in her grief-stricken mind, and I, who had spent years emotionally weakening her with my hatred and cruel words, had prepared the perfect ground for them to operate. I screamed with all my spiritual strength, "Leave her alone. Stay away from her." But it was useless. They either didn't hear me or simply didn't care. I tried to stand between them and my mother, but my ethereal form passed right through without effect. It was completely powerless. More entities began to appear. 2 more emerged from the dark corners of the room, drawn like flies to rotting meat. One had multiple eyes scattered chaotically across its amorphous form. The other resembled a distorted female figure with long hair that moved like snakes. They all converged on my mother, all whispering, all injecting spiritual poison into her vulnerable mind. "Take the sleeping pills, all of them in the medicine cabinet," one suggested. "It would be so easy, so quick." and the pain would be over. My mother shook her head slightly, though she didn't know why. Something in her was resisting. "Oh, curse God," another demanded. "Spit on your Bible, break that rosary, renounce everything you believed in." It was no use. My mother's hands gripped the rosary tighter, so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I saw other people in the room, the neighbors, the family members, and I realized with dread that they too were being stalked by similar entities, though in smaller numbers and with less intensity. It was as if there were an entire invisible world superimposed on the physical world, a spiritual war constantly raging that the living couldn't perceive. But my mother was the primary target in that room. She was being besieged with particular ferocity. Then I understood why my mother wasn't just any victim. She was a prayer warrior. For decades she had been in the spiritual trenches interceding, worshipping, declaring the word of God over her family and her community. She represented a threat to the kingdom of darkness, and now, in her moment of greatest weakness, they saw the perfect opportunity to destroy her, to make her renounce her faith, to drag her into the same abyss of despair where I had lived. And the worst, the absolutely most devastating thing was realizing that I had been their accomplice. Every insult I hurled at her, every cruel word, every time I mocked her faith, I was weakening her spiritual defenses. I was facilitating the work of these demonic entities. My hatred I had been a tool in the hands of forces I swore didn't exist. "I'm sorry, Mom," I cried without tears because spirits can't cry. "I'm so sorry, forgive me, please, hold on, don't let them win." But she couldn't hear me. She was alone in her battle, surrounded by invisible enemies, with only her battered faith as a shield. The demons intensified their attack. The air in the room, though the living didn't notice, became suffocating with pure evil. Then, just when I thought my mother would give in, when I saw her shoulders begin to slump in utter defeat, when the greatest demon extended its claw toward her chest to tear all hope from her heart, something impossible happened. The roof of the house opened. The roof of the house in San Javier opened. It didn't break or disintegrate, it simply ceased to exist, as if an invisible hand had pulled aside a veil, and what I saw beyond that vanished ceiling left me paralyzed in such profound awe that had I possessed a physical body, I would have fallen to my knees. There was another dimension superimposed upon our world, a realm that existed simultaneously, yet invisible, to mortal eyes, and that realm was filled with light. It was not the light of the sun or electric lamps, it was a living, conscious light that seemed to possess weight and substance. From that celestial opening, a column of radiance began to descend, so brilliant that even in my spiritual form I had to avert my gaze. The demons that had been stalking my mother immediately retreated, hissing much like burning snakes, their dark forms shrinking at the approach of that light. The largest demon, the one that had been whispering suicidal thoughts into my mother's ear, shrieked with a sound that was half rage and half pure terror. And then I saw him descending through that celestial opening, enveloped in a light that made everything else seem like shadow. He was a being of colossal proportions. He was an angel of the Lord, though to call him simply an angel doesn't do justice to the terrifying majesty of what my spiritual eyes witnessed. He was easily 3 meters tall, perhaps more, with a structure that was simultaneously human and absolutely non-human. His body emanated a golden light that pulsed like a living heart, and he was clothed in what I can only describe as garments of glory woven from rays of liquid sunlight. His face was both beautiful and terrible, features perfectly symmetrical, yet with a seriousness and authority that conveyed absolute power. His eyes were not like human eyes, but like wells of white fire that saw all, knew all, judged all. And above his head was something much like a crown of light interwoven with flames that did not consume. In her right hand she carried a sword, but not a sword of ordinary metal. It was a blade of pure light that left luminous trails in the air as it moved, and simply looking directly at it was like looking into the core of the sun. The demons panicked. The one with multiple eyes began to retreat toward the walls, trying to merge with the shadows. The skeletal one shrank in on itself, trembling violently. The distorted female entity let out a high-pitched scream that resonated on frequencies that humans couldn't hear. but that I felt like needles piercing my consciousness. Everyone knew what had arrived, everyone recognized the authority that this celestial being possessed. The angel descended until it was floating directly above my mother, who was still sitting in her chair praying the rosary with tears falling onto her wrinkled hands. She couldn't see him, not with her physical eyes, but something in her spirit sensed him because her face changed. The despair that had been growing in her features began to soften, her shoulders, which they had been slumping under the weight of grief, but they straightened slightly. It was as if an invisible hand had touched their souls. The angel spoke. His voice was not sound in the conventional sense, but rather a vibration that shook reality itself. When he spoke, the walls of the house trembled on the spiritual plane. The demonic entities shrank even further, and I felt every syllable resonate in the core of my being. He spoke in a language my ears have never heard, an ancient and powerful tongue that existed before humans learned to form words, but my spirit understood every word with perfect clarity. Depart. The angel thundered, just that word, but spoken with such authority that it was like a celestial thunderclap. This servant is under the blood covenant of the Lamb. You have no dominion here. The effect was instantaneous and devastating for the dark entities. The largest demon, the one that had been trying to drive my mother to suicide, was flung back as if struck by an invisible battering ram. It crashed against the opposite wall of the room, piercing through it in the spirit realm, howling in agony. The one with the claws tried to flee toward the door, but the angel simply extended his left hand and a wave of light shot out. The wave reached the demon and enveloped it like a shimmering net. The creature writhed and shrieked, its dark form beginning to disintegrate under the touch of that holy light. The other demons didn't wait. The multi-eyed one dissolved into black smoke and fled through the cracks in the walls. The female entity became a cloud of darkness and escaped beneath the door. The skeletal figure tried to crawl into a corner, but the angel turned its gaze upon it, and under that celestial scrutiny, the creature simply ceased to exist, evaporating like dew in the morning sun. In a matter of seconds, all the demons had been banished. The room, which moments before had been teeming with palpable evil, was now clean, but the angel wasn't finished. It turned to my mother, and its stern expression softened into something I can only describe as infinite tenderness mingled with profound respect. It extended its arms, and from them emerged something astonishing, a mantle of liquid light, as if the glory of God itself had been woven into a visible garment. The angel enveloped my mother in that mantle. She couldn't see it on the physical plane, but her body reacted immediately. The tremors that had shaken her shoulders ceased. The tears continued to fall, but they changed in nature, from tears of despair to tears of something more, something akin to peace. Her breathing, which had been ragged and anguished, became deeper and calmer. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Carmenza, the angel said, and hearing her name spoken with such reverence by a celestial being, I felt my spiritual heart break. Faithful daughter of the Most High, warrior of prayer, tireless intercessor, your cry has been heard at the throne of grace. Your prayers have risen like fragrant incense before the Lord of hosts, and he in his infinite mercy has decreed that you be protected in this dark hour. Then something happened that changed me forever. The space around me began to transform. The funeral home began to fade as if it were a projection that someone was slowly turning off, and in its place, another vision appeared. I saw Jesus not as an ethereal or imaginary figure, but as real and solid as any person I have ever known in life, yet radiant with a glory that made the angel it seemed faint in comparison. Jesus stood before me, and his eyes gazed at me with an intensity that pierced every corner of my soul. They were not eyes of condemnation, though I deserved condemnation. They were eyes of absolute truth, of painful love, of perfect justice mingled with incomprehensible mercy. He wore white robes that shone, and on his hands and feet I could see the nail marks, and on his side the spear wound. Those wounds also shone, but with a red light like liquid rubies. James, Jesus said, and his voice was like flowing water, like the sound of many voices speaking in perfect harmony. See what you could not see with mortal eyes. He raised his hand, and the space around us transformed. Again, I saw scenes from my life playing out like a three-dimensional film that completely surrounded me, but they weren't just scenes from my life, they were scenes from my life with an added layer of reality that I had never perceived. I saw the spiritual realm overlaid on every moment of my existence. I saw my mother praying for me when I was 5 years old after I had fallen out of a tree. On the physical plane, I only remember that she had comforted me and healed my scrapes, but now I saw that while she prayed, angels had descended and placed their hands on my small body, speeding up the healing, protecting my bones from fractures that should have occurred. I saw my mother praying for me when I was 15 years old and had started hanging out with neighborhood gangs. In the physical world, I thought I had been lucky never to get really involved in violence, but now I saw that every time a gang member tried to recruit me, there were angels blocking the way, creating coincidences that kept me out of harm's way. I saw my mother praying for me when I was 22 years old and fell into a severe depression when I first thought about suicide. I remembered that dark night when I sat on the edge of the Mother Laura Bridge, staring down at the Medellin River below, calculating whether the fall would be enough to kill me. What I didn't know was that my mother, at that exact moment, had awakened from her sleep with my name on her lips and had fallen to her knees, praying in spiritual warfare, and while she prayed, I saw angels literally pulling me back from that bridge, planting thoughts in my mind about reasons to live, creating a distraction when my cell phone rang with a work call. Every prayer, Jesus said, every tear, every time she cried out, "My name upon you," built walls of protection around your life. You lived to be 28, not by luck or coincidence. You lived because a faithful mother interceded without ceasing, even when you cursed her, even when you wished for her death, even when you treated her with cruelty that would make stones weep. He showed me more scenes. I saw all the times I should have died, but didn't. The shooting in the neighborhood when a stray bullet whizzed inches from my head. The robbery I was a victim of where the thief had a gun, but inexplicably chose not to fire. The remote, minor accidents I had over the years, each of which could have been fatal, but never was, and in every scene I saw the angelic intervention, and behind every intervention I saw my mother on her knees with her Bible open and her rosary in hand. While you were a cruel son, Jesus continued, and his words were like swords cutting through my soul. She was a valiant warrior. While you mocked her faith, she was winning battles in places you didn't even know existed. While you counted the days awaiting her death, she was paying the price in prayer to extend your days. I saw the full record of my wickedness. Every insult, every cruel word, every moment of contempt, was all etched in perfect clarity, and beside every act of my hatred, I saw a corresponding act of her intercession. It was the most devastating contrast imaginable, my darkness against her light, my selfishness against her sacrifice, my spiritual death against her abundant life in Christ. The prayers of the righteous, Jesus said, are powerful and effective, and your mother, James, is counted among my righteous ones, not by perfection, but by faith, not by works, but by grace. She knows me, she loves me, and she has dedicated her life to serving me. That is why heaven defends her, that is why the angels protect her, that is why, even now in her darkest hour of pain, I do not abandon her. Then Jesus showed me something that completely broke me. He showed me the heavenly record book where all the prayers my mother had said for me were written. It was a literal, enormous book, with pages that shone with golden light, page after page after page, filled with records of her intercessions, early morning prayers, prayers on the bus on her way to work, prayers while she cooked, prayers while she cleaned, whispered prayers, shouted prayers, prayers in times of joy and in times of anguish, thousands and thousands of prayers, all recorded, all heard, all powerful before the throne of God. This, which Jesus said while touching the book, is the legacy of a mother who loved her son even when her son hated her, and for this reason, for this unwavering faithfulness, she has access to the army of heaven. For this reason, when demons try to destroy her, I send my most powerful angels to defend her, because she is mine and I take care of my own. I fell, or whatever it is that a spirit does when it can no longer bear under the weight of revealed truth. For the first time since I died, I felt something like physical pain. But it was a pain of the soul, a remorse so deep that it penetrated to the very foundation of my existence. What have I done? I managed to whisper, my God, what have I done? Jesus looked at me, and in his eyes I saw both the answer to my sin and the possibility of redemption, and then he spoke the words that would change my eternity. Santiago Montoya, it is not your time to stay here, I am sending you back, but you are not returning as the same man, you are returning as a witness to the truth you have seen. You return to honor your mother, to proclaim my name, and to warn others about the price of pride and the power of faithful prayer. And with those words, everything began to fade, the vision, the angel, the funeral home, everything dissolved into pure white light, and I began to fall or rise back into my body lying on a hospital gurney in Medellin, Colombia. The miracle was about to begin. The return was violent. It wasn't a gentle or gradual awakening, like waking from a peaceful nap. It was like being thrown from a plane without a parachute and crashing to earth at terminal velocity. 1 second I was in the presence of Jesus, enveloped in heavenly light and revealed truth. And the next I was being crushed back into a broken body that didn't want to receive me. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming. Every nerve in my body exploded in simultaneous agony. I felt the fractured ribs digging into my lungs, my split skull throbbing with each beat of my heart, which had just restarted, my left leg screaming through bones that had splintered on impact. My eyes snapped open. The surgical lights of the San Vicente Foundation Hospital blinded me. The breathing tube in my throat made me feel like I was choking. I tried to pull it out with my hands, but someone held my arms. Voices were shouting around me in rapid, urgent Spanish. He's awake, my God, he's awake. Vital signs stabilizing. Ruiz, come quickly, you have to see this. I tried to scream, but the tube was blocking my throat. Only a guttural, animalistic, desperate sound came out. Dr. Hector J.V. Ruiz appeared above me, his face showing an expression I had never seen on a doctor, utter shock, mixed with disbelief. I had been at the hospital when they declared my imminent death 5 minutes earlier. He was the one who had almost turned off the heart monitor to record my time of death, and now he was looking at me with the eyes of someone who had just witnessed something his medical training told him was impossible. Santiago, calm down, he said. While a nurse prepared sedatives, he's in the hospital, he had an accident, but he's alive, we're going to remove the tube. I need you to stop. I struggled, but I couldn't calm down. All that filled my mind was the image of my mother, Doña Carmenza, weeping at that future wake I had witnessed, of the demons stalking her, of the angel defending her, of Jesus showing me the book of his prayers. I needed to see her, I needed to ask her forgiveness, I needed to tell her that everything I had seen was real, that she had been right all along, that I had been blind and deaf and spiritually dead. It took 3 nurses and a resident to keep me still while Ruiz carefully removed the intubation tube. When it finally came out, I coughed violently, spitting up blood and fluids. My throat burned as if I had swallowed glass, but as soon as I could form words, I began to scream, my mum. My mum, where's my mum, Carmenza? I need my mum. The words came out broken, desperate, like those of a child lost in a market. Your mother is on her way, said one of the nurses, an older woman with kind eyes named Teresa. According to her ID badge, the police contacted her an hour ago. She's coming from San Javier. An hour. In my spiritual experience, days had passed. I had seen my own wake, but in the real time of San Vicente Hospital, barely an hour had passed since I was admitted. Time in the spiritual realm operated in entirely different dimensions. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of medical activity. They took X-rays, CT scans, and drew blood. They hooked up more monitors, adjusted 4 medications, and checked my vital signs again and again, as if they couldn't believe what the instruments were showing them. I heard Ruiz talking to other doctors in the hallway, his voice filled with professional awe. 5 minutes and 23 seconds of cardiac arrest with no cerebral circulation during that entire time. According to all medical protocols, I should have had severe brain damage if I survived, but look at the CT scans. My brain is completely normal, no hypoxia, no edema, nothing. It's as if I had never been dead, but I had been dead, deader than any medical scanner could measure, and I had returned not through the skill of the doctors, although God had used them as instruments, but by a divine decree. Jesus himself had sent me back for a specific purpose, and that purpose burned in my chest stronger than any physical pain. 40 minutes passed, which felt like 40 years. I had been transferred to an intensive care unit, surrounded by beeping machines and monitors displaying my vital signs. Nurses came in every few minutes to check something, their faces showing barely concealed curiosity. Clearly, news of my resurrection had spread through the hospital. I overheard two young residents talking in the hallway. They say the guy was technically dead for more than 5 minutes. Oh, that's impossible without brain damage. Well, you go and tell him that. He's completely conscious and coherent. Then I heard her voice, my mother's voice, echoing down the hospital corridor, broken by sobs and panic. Where is my son? Where is Santiago? They told me there was an accident. Please, where is my heart? That organ that had stopped beating and had been miraculously restarted began to race. The monitors started beeping faster. A nurse poked her head in. Your mother is here, would you like to see her? I nodded, unable to speak because of the lump in my throat. Doña Carmen Zarendon, Montoya's widow, entered that intensive care unit room, her face ravaged by tears. She was wearing the same flowered dress she had on that morning when I had thrown her breakfast on the floor. Her grey hair was disheveled, a sign that she had run out of the house without even looking in the mirror. Her eyes, red and swollen, found me immediately. For a second she froze in the doorway, as if she couldn't believe I was alive and awake. Then she let out a cry of relief mixed with anguish and ran to the bed. My little boy, my Santiago, thank God, thank God. My hands trembled as they touched my face, checking that I was real. Tears streamed down my cheeks, mingling with my own, and then I did something I hadn't done in over 10 years, something the Santiago of that morning would never have done, something the proud, cruel atheist I was would have considered an unforgivable weakness. I slid out of bed, ignoring the explosive pain in my broken leg, ignoring the nurse's cries of alarm, ignoring the wires and tubes connecting me to the machines. I fell to my knees on the cold hospital floor in front of my mother. My hands clutched the hem of her flowered dress, that humble dress she'd probably bought at the San Ela market for a few thousand pesos, and I tore. Forgive me, I sobbed, the words spilling out between uncontrollable moans. Mom, forgive me for everything, for every insult, for every cruel word, for every time I treated you like trash. Forgive me for wishing you dead, forgive me for mocking your faith, forgive me, Mom, please, forgive me. My forehead touched the hospital floor, a posture of complete humiliation and repentance. I died, Mom, I truly died, and I saw everything. I saw the demons trying to destroy you, I saw God's angel defending you, I saw Jesus, I saw every prayer you said for me, I saw that it was all real, everything. Mom, your God is real, your faith is real, and I was a cursed child who didn't deserve a minute of your prayers, but you prayed for me anyway. My mother fell to her knees beside me, wrapping her arms around me, weeping over my head, just as she had wept when I was a child and fell or hurt myself. But these tears were different. They were tears of answered intercession, of years of prayer that had finally broken her son's heart of stone. It's okay, my little boy, she whispered, it's okay, God brought you back, He answered my prayers, He always answers. The nurses didn't know what to do. Ruiz had rushed in upon hearing the commotion and stood in the doorway watching the scene of mother and son kneeling on the floor, weeping, and something softened in his face. He, too, was Colombian. He, too, had been raised in a Catholic home where mothers prayed, and he was witnessing something his scientific mind couldn't explain, but his Colombian heart understood perfectly. They helped me back into bed. My mother didn't let go of my hand for a second, and there, in that hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and sterile death, I told her everything. I told her about the accident, about floating out of my body, about seeing my own wake, about the demons that surrounded her, whispering lies. I told her about the colossal angel who descended from heaven, about how he expelled those entities with a single word over the cloak of light that enveloped her, and I told her about Jesus, about how he showed me the book of his prayers, about how each of his intercessions had built walls of angelic protection around my life that I didn't even know existed. She wept and laughed at the same time, praising God aloud. "Glory to you, Lord Jesus, glory to your name. I knew you hadn't abandoned me, I knew you were working in my son." She took her rosary from her dress pocket, that same rosary of white beads that I had seen in her hand during the spiritual wake, and she began to pray the Hail Mary with a trembling voice, but full of joy. The following days at San Vicente Hospital were a continuous testament to God's miraculous power. The doctors could not to explain my recovery. The fractures in my skull began to heal at a rate that defied conventional medicine. My leg, which had required surgery to insert metal plates, showed bone consolidation in a week when it should have taken months. Drive. Ruiz heard my confession privately. "Santiago, I have been a doctor for 23 years. I have seen cases I cannot explain, but you are the first that makes me want to return to the church where my mother took me as a child." I left the hospital 18 days after the accident, walking with crutches, but alive, conscious, transformed. My mother took me back to the house of Street Xavier, that house I had despised and now saw as the palace it had always been. She had turned my room into a shrine of thanksgiving with fresh flowers and an image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus that shone with a lit candle, but I could not simply return to normal life. Jesus had given me a mission, and that mission burned in my soul like holy fire. I quit my job as a messenger, sold my motorcycle or what was left of it after the accident and began doing the only thing I knew I had to do, share my story. I started in the plazas of Medellin, Bolivar Park, Barefoot Park, anywhere people gathered. I would stand there on crutches and share my story. At first, people walked by, thinking I was just another crazy person among the many who shout in the streets of Colombia, but there was something in my voice, something in my urgency, that made some people stop, and when I told them about the 5 minutes I was dead, about the demons and the angel, about my mother's prayer book, people cried. Mothers with rebellious children would approach me afterward. They would take my hands and beg me to pray for their families. Churches began inviting me, small congregations in the poor neighborhoods of the communes, large churches in the town, youth groups, couples retreats. My testimony was always the same. A cruel son had scorned his faithful mother. He had wished for her death, and God had shown him the truth in the most dramatic way possible. It was a warning about the commandment to honor your father and mother. It was a revelation about the power of intercessory prayer. It was a proclamation that the spiritual world is as real as ever. My relationship with my mother was completely transformed. Now I am the one who wakes up at 5 a.m. to pray with her. I am the one who reads the Bible aloud at night. I am the one who invites the neighbors for novenas on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and when she looks at me, I see in her eyes not only a mother's love, but also the joy of a prayer warrior who saw victory after years of battle. Today, 3 years after my death and resurrection, I serve as a lay evangelist on the streets of Medellin. I have no theological degree or official credentials. I only have a testimony that burns in my soul like a burning coal. And every time I see a child mistreating their mother, every time I hear someone mocking their parents' faith, I approach them and tell them my story, because I am Santiago Montoya, the son who died hating his mother and returned to honor her. I am the atheist who saw Jesus face to face and now cannot stop proclaiming his name. I am the living witness that the prayers of a faithful mother can move the army of heaven, invoke powerful angels, and bring a dead child back to life. And if my testimony can save even one wayward child from making the same mistakes I made, if it can give hope, even to a mother weeping for her lost child, if it can show someone that the spiritual world is as real as the air we breathe, then every moment of pain I suffered, every tear I shed, and every minute I spent feeling dead inside will have been completely worth it, because as Proverbs 23:22 says, "Listen to your father, who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old." I despised him, and God, in his terrible and beautiful mercy, showed me the cost of that sin and gave me a second chance. Don't waste yours.